I am so conservative,
Rationalized in my head. These are things I read in
and
the
I'm going to talk about
scriptures.
Willow Creek.
Okay.
Willow Creek, a few years back, had
Remembered
invited.
at the time when Will Rogers said, I don't belong to any organized religion. I'm a Baptist.
Yeah.
I am so conservative. If he didn't jump to conclusions, he might not get any exercise. I am so conservative. I am so conservative. And welcome to the Unknown Webcast. Today, December 14, 2021. And this is broadcast number 269. This is just a trigger warning for those who believe words are more injurious than sticks and stones. I really am so conservative, I can't turn left even when I'm driving. In addition to giving trigger warnings to our viewers, Ron Hensel and I both drink coffee for your protection. Our friend Donald Williams joins us today as we consider life's big questions: to be or not to be. Well, actually, that's not the one, but
Yeah.
how can you base your modern life on a book written by for primitive culture? My name is Don Vino. I'm president of Midwest Christian Outreach Inc. in Wonder Lake, Illinois, which produces the Unknown Webcast. And our senior researcher is Ron Hensel, who will introduce the sponsors of today's webcast. And here's Senior Ronnie.
Signor Rani, yes. Welcome. Greetings from sunny Florida, where the palm trees came out, saw their shadows. And now we have 12 more months of summer. Our sponsor for this edition of the Unknown Webcast is Assimilation Ministries, where implanted in the body is not just a slogan. Assimilated Ministries. Our regular legal disclaimer: our guest on today's webcast, insert name here, that would be Donald Williams, has no connection whatsoever to any of the satirical content of the Unknown Webcast, hereafter known as the webcast, although we probably will not mention it again. This
And
satirical
we don't know
content
if he has a sense of
includes,
humor anyway.
we were not sure. I had mine surgically removed. It includes any and all commercials, end credits, puns, smart remarks, or anything else that might fall under the definition of satire. In the meantime, Midwest Christian Outreach Inc. bears no liability for or responsibility for anyone's opinions regarding this satirical content. Our regular announcements: notice the opinions expressed on this webcast are ours and should be yours too, to ensure continued access to this program. If you enjoy it, or even if you just want to inflict it on someone else, please go to MidwestChristianOutreach.org. Click the yellow donate button and contribute as you feel led. Don't forget, this webcast is Y2K compliant. And don't forget also to subscribe to us on your favorite video channels. Welcome, Donald Williams. Greetings.
I am so deprived of any sense of humor that I wrote a book called The Devil's Dictionary of the Christian Faith. Basically, if Screwtape had written the Oxford Dictionary of the Christian Church, and that book contains absolutely no satire, no humor, no sarcasm whatsoever.
Everything is true.
And I did not write it, and you cannot prove that I did.
Okay. We will not make the attempt.
Yeah,
but you won't mind if we endorse it and push it once we have read it.
Well, everybody should buy a copy of it for themselves, their church library, their school library, all their friends, relatives, acquaintances, and enemies, and 10 other copies just in case they ever need them.
Right. You got them handy.
If they do this and pay cash, they're absolutely guaranteed an unlimited supply of health and wealth in this life, and in the next life, well, they'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah. I know how. Yeah, I've seen that offer before. It's not available on Amazon or in stores. So
funny. So
we're good.
Don Williams, you are Professor Emeritus from where? Just so people get reintroduced to you.
Toccoa Falls College is a small Christian liberal arts college in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains in northeast Georgia. And they put up with me for about 32 years. And then I retired, and apparently they still can't exist without me. I just finished teaching a course on the history of the English language this fall. So I like still having access to students, because without minds to corrupt, I mean, what is there for us to do?
Right.
Exactly. So when you say liberal arts, does that mean it's liberal or just artistic, or what does that mean?
Well, a Christian liberal arts college is a Bible college, a former Bible college that is not yet a secular university.
Okay.
That's the basic definition.
So I probably need to reach out for a little more definition, because this is a terminology that we use a lot. And in recent years, we have seen, especially the last 18 months to 24 months, that language has taken on all kinds of new meanings and definitions. And culture, it seems, doesn't really know that there's only two genders, because gender is, culture fluid. You can just be whatever you want to be, just redefine it. So when you talk about a liberal arts college, what does those terms mean?
Well, what they actually are supposed to mean is liberal is not from the Latin word for library or book, as you might think. It's actually the same root in our word for liberate or liberty. So the liberal arts originally were those subjects that were appropriate to free people as opposed to slaves. A slave being somebody who's defined by his job, a free man or a citizen being someone who's expected to be a leader and have some influence in society. So the humanities, literature, philosophy, history, people need to know how to do their job, but they also need to understand history and human nature and think about some of the great ideas, so that they can be more than just cogs in an economic machine, so they can actually influence their fellow citizens for good, influence public policy in the right way. So the liberal arts are supposed to be the liberating arts. And I connect that with Jesus' statement that if you know the truth will set you free. That's the ideal behind the idea of the liberal arts. As we all know, the distance between ideal and reality just keeps increasing, it seems like, every day. But,
it does.
But at least some colleges still aspire to embody something of that ideal.
Okay. So that actually gets us to our topic here.
We have a topic?
We have a topic.
We actually, yeah, I know. Both of you are shocked and amazed.
We're just amazed, It's just...
But there is our topic for the day.
That's right. It's a question that you hear a lot from skeptics, people who want to escape the influence of the Bible and escape the authority of the Bible in their lives. How can you base your modern life on a book written for a primitive culture? Now, a lot of assumptions in that question, some of which hopefully we'll have a chance to unpack. What do we mean by a primitive culture? What has actually changed from ancient times to today? Well, a lot has changed, but not everything. And so getting a handle on that, I think, will help us understand not only who we are as modern / postmodern people, but also to understand where we've come from and how the Bible can function as a guidebook for modern people. It might be that its very primitive origins are an advantage rather than a disadvantage.
Well, it's funny that you use the word postmodern, because the postmodernists would not assume that the modern is good.
No.
And the primitive is bad. But that...
well, they assume that the primitive is bad and the modern is bad. They basically assume that everything is bad except
them. Okay. Except for them, right? Because they're the ones who sit in judgment on everything. So, but would they necessarily assume that the modern is better than the primitive?
Not necessarily.
Yeah. So.
But pretty soon they're going to be superseded by the postmoderns.
Yeah.
And the postmoderns who come after that.
And they'll all have negative things to say about the postmodernists.
That's right.
Which probably won't be appreciated when they are, when they're, yeah.
When you name your movement, be careful how you name it.
Yeah.
It might not make sense in another 10 or 15 years. What's changed from the ancient world, the world of the Bible, until today? The main thing that's different is that we have a more formalized version of the scientific method. Now, ancient people knew how to do inductive reasoning. They knew how to make observations about nature. And they had figured an amazing number of things out. They knew that the earth was spherical. In fact, Eratosthenes had calculated the circumference of the earth to within a couple of 100 miles of the actual figure.
He did a pretty good job, I heard.
Yeah, based on observations they could make back then. But what's changed from those days is a more formalized version of the scientific method that's been systematized so that you go from observation to a hypothesis to experiments designed specifically to test that hypothesis. And then based on the experiment, you revise the hypothesis or you get rid of it and try a new one. And you put this all together in a systematic understanding of the way the world works. And that's what we call modern science. And it has allowed us to make some impressive improvements in technology. Not that the ancient people didn't have some impressive technology of their own. I mean, after all, they built the pyramids, they built the Parthenon, etc. But we have far better communications, transportation, and maybe most importantly, sanitation than they did. And consequently, our lives are longer, safer, and in many external ways better. Nobody wants to go back to a world before chloroform. Nobody wants to go back to a world before antibiotics. Nobody wants to go back to biting on a bullet and getting a shot of whiskey when they saw your arm off because you took a mini ball to one of your bones in the Civil War. The modern world is in many ways drastically improved over what our ancestors knew. But obviously, there are many very, very positive aspects to this. But the problem is that in that process, you might want to hit your button another time or two there, Don. In that process, in all these gains, we might have lost some things. We have better lives that are longer, safer, and less painful. We also have more powerful weapons and more efficient ways of polluting the environment. The downside to all this, which most people don't think about, is a process called secularization. And this results from the fact that we now live in a world that is dominated by machines. We're surrounded by machines. We're using machines to talk to our audience, assuming that we have one, right now. But I mean, we're surrounded by machines, and our whole environment is based increasingly, more with every passing day, on interaction with machines. We don't interact with nature directly anymore, but mainly with machines. And those machines include some very impressive things like electric light, better transportation. There's a whole list of things we have that our ancestors could hardly even have imagined, culminating with the personal computer and the smartphone. I mean, all of us have more computing power in our pocket than the astronauts had who went to the moon.
Yeah.
So we're surrounded by machines. And the other thing that this causes is an increased rate of change, because the machines are changing and they're being improved all the time. My father could remember seeing his first automobile and his first airplane. He was old enough to remember the sight of. He can remember a world when there were no automobiles, not in Coweta County, Georgia. And he saw the first one. He remembers his first airplane, and he lived to see men walk on the moon.
Mm.
And so my father went from basically the same transportation technology that was shared by the Greeks and the Romans, essentially, to the 20th century and made it into the 21st in one lifetime.
Yeah.
So change is happening, and the changes we notice are a lot of changes for the better. What would you rather have? The computer that you're using to be part of this broadcast, or a TRS-80? What would you rather have? The car now, or the car you were driving in 1973?
Sometimes now, okay. When it comes to pickup, and but as far as gas mileage is concerned, yeah, that's the other side of it.
So we, as a result of this, we have a new set of default settings. We assume, without thinking about it, that the new is good, the old is bad, because we're just surrounded by examples of that, and we assume that everything is going to change, and it's probably in the long run going to change for the better. C.S. Lewis referred to this assumption as chronological snobbery, the idea that the new is good. The way we think now, obviously, is an advancement over the way people thought in the past, etc. So the world has changed in ways that give us a new set of assumptions about the world. The problem is that the world itself hasn't changed. Man's way of experiencing the world has changed because we're surrounded by machines and technology, but the world itself hasn't changed. I want to talk about the things that don't change because most people have forgotten about them. And by the way, the Parthenon isn't one of them, because what you're seeing on the right is not the way it actually looks now. It got messed up pretty badly. Nothing that man creates doesn't change, but the principles of balance and symmetry that made the Parthenon a beautiful building, those haven't changed. Nature herself has not changed. Milk still comes from cows, even though a large number of kids today think it comes from cartons. But it still comes from cows. And all of the laws of nature that we use to create all this technology are exactly the same as they were for Alexander the Great, exactly the same as they were for Moses or Abraham. And so the illusion that everything changes and changes for the better is something that we need to recognize as an illusion and realize there are things that haven't changed. Yeah. Another thing that hasn't changed is basic moral principles. Murder, the unjustified taking of another human life, is wrong. It's still wrong. It's wrong for the same reason it's always been wrong. The only thing that's changed is we now have a proliferation of extra methods we can use to do it. Our ancestors, if you go back far enough, they could have knocked off their neighbor with a rock or a spear or an arrow or a knife. We can still do that, but now we can also use firearms of various levels of efficiency. We can run over him with a train or a car. We can throw him out of the window of a skyscraper. We have options. We have methods that our ancestors didn't have. But the meaning of the act is unchanged. It's not affected by this proliferation of methods. And so the first thing we need to get under our belts is the idea that even though we live in a world that tries to convince us that everything is changing and changing for the better and nothing is permanent, in fact, that's not true. Some things change, some things don't. Some things change for the better, some things change for the worse. You have to evaluate each one of them on its own merits, and you can't really operate with this default setting of chronological snobbery. But it's understandable our contemporaries do, because their experience of the world, dominated by machines and by the continual improvement of those machines, sets them up to think that way. Well, I think we're ready to get back to our original question. How can you base your modern life on a book that was written for an ancient world? Well, given that there are things that haven't changed, maybe people who wrote about those things back before the default setting of change and change being always improvement was created, maybe they might have some insights that we particularly need today.
Well, and they had the same kinds of questions like we spoke about last night.
Yeah,
you have Shakespeare having Hamlet ask the big question: what happens after I die? To be or not to be?
That is the question. Whether it is nobler in the mind to bear the slings and arrows of
outrageous fortune,
or to take arms against a sea of troubles and by opposing end them.
Yes, I don't know. Or listening to this being said.
By that say, we end the heartache and the thousand natural shocks that flesh is heir to. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished.
Yes.
To die, to sleep, perchance to dream.
Right. That's what I always say.
Never mind. Okay.
So
let's not go there. Before
it's
death, what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil must give us pause.
Yeah.
Okay, that was a complete and total tangent. No extra charge.
Yeah. Okay.
Back to the topic. Ancient literature is full of wisdom that we need even more precisely because we live in the modern world and consequently have lost touch with the unchanging realities that are still there underneath that surface. For example, we can think about the Iliad, which teaches us about the futility of war. I've been teaching the Iliad of Homer for 30, 40 years. And one of the things I've noticed is that the students who resonate with it and get into it the deepest are my veterans. Started out veterans of Vietnam, veterans then of Desert Storm, of Afghanistan, of Iraq. Those guys really got into this thing the way their contemporaries who hadn't had that experience couldn't do, because they were all saying, yeah, this is war. This is exactly what we experienced. And Homer's description of why we screw it up so badly and why we don't win because our leaders are driven by pride and motivations other than they should be. This is exactly the way it works in the real world today. When C.S. Lewis showed up at the front in World War I and a bullet whizzed past his head, the thought went through his mind, this is what Homer wrote about. This is war. The Odyssey, the power of faithful love to motivate Odysseus to get home to Penelope, to motivate Penelope to wait for him for 20 years. The Oedipus Rex, the play by Sophocles about Oedipus, dealing with how individual human beings relate to destiny, to fate. Virgil's Aeneid, the value of and the importance of sacrifice in a noble cause. The tragedy, of course, is that Roman Empire didn't turn out to be the noble cause that Virgil thought it was. One generation later than him, a generation or two later, you're getting the corruption of Nero, and the reality of Rome doesn't turn out to be what he wanted it to be. But still, people find inspiration and wisdom in this ancient literature. And the very fact that it is ancient, that it's not just repeating your experience of modern life, which you already got without needing to read a book about it, is what gives it its power. The Bible is ancient literature. And so with the Bible, we get all of that and more, because the Bible gives you everything that other ancient literature gives you, as we've been discussing, but it's also inspired by God. It's the Word of God. And consequently, it comes with the same kind of insights and even other ones with a diagnosis of the human condition and the only path to redemption for human beings in that condition. And all of this comes with the authority, not just of human wisdom, but of God himself. And so, it might be that the Bible, because it's ancient, is something we need even more than we might think. So, in conclusion, I doubt we've hit Ron's goal of doing this in 7 minutes, but
I don't remember that goal.
yeah, so we left that behind more than 7 minutes ago. So, in conclusion, last slide, the Bible gives us something that's really primitive. I mean, let's think about that word primitive for a minute. Primitive can mean more than one thing. It can mean undeveloped and backwards, which is the way most modern people use it. But primitive can also mean original and unspoiled. And so the Bible actually is written in a primitive time, and it's the best guide we could possibly have for modern life, precisely because it is primitive. It's God's truth, original and unspoiled, without the distractions that you get in the modern world. Consequently, it gives us meaning, not method. Its focus isn't on all the different ways and techniques and technologies you can use to do stuff, but on the meaning of the things themselves. Mm-hmm. It gives us meaning, not method, truth, not trivia, and authority, not opinion. And so, it's precisely because the Bible is an ancient book and because it is primitive in that wonderfully positive sense of original and unspoiled, that it not only can give us guidance for modern lives, but is the only source that adequately does so, dealing with the depths of our depravity and the path to salvation, to light, and not only to a meaningful life with purpose in this life, but to eternal life. So I will give you a purpose, a reason for living so great that it would make it worthwhile doing it, not only for this life, but for the rest of eternity.
Well, it is important, and Ron and I were talking just before we started. When we think of primitive culture, as you point out, many people think of, just not just really old, but backwards almost. They could barely speak a spoken language, mostly sign language. And as I read the Ante-Nicene Fathers, for example, I was shocked at how many of the arguments that they formulated in the 2nd and 3rd and 4th century that we are still using today because they are so powerful. They were well thought out, reasoned through discussions of biblical truth and refuting heresy. Ron recently posted on the question of the advance of medicines. Yes, we have better medicines today and perhaps better techniques. But Ron came across an interesting discovery. What was it, Ron?
Well, they found an ancient Roman, I think circa 2nd or 3rd century AD surgical kit. And, you had pretty much most of the instruments looked like modern. I mean, they're not electronic, of course, but they, you have the whatever corresponded to a scalpel, whatever, you had these very finely honed needle-like objects for picking and poking and prodding, probing into parts of a body that was obviously cut open. There were several different kinds of these. Plus, they were all located inside a metal box that had a sliding lid. It had lips around it to slide the lid, a flat lid. I mean, this is a very carefully crafted piece of equipment that really was indistinguishable from something that would have been made, in the 19th, 20th, 21st centuries, other than the fact that it was old and beat up. But then, you could probably find a lot of objects that were made in with technology from more, the last few generations that are also beat up and look like that. I wouldn't have been able to tell by looking at it that it was almost 2,000 years old. I would have assumed it was much more recent.
So language, it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, you're both of you are more familiar with linguistics than I am, but it seems to me language was more complicated even than it is today.
Yeah, mostly. Well, it's
Well,
much less inflected today, at least ours.
Yeah, Proto-Indo-European had 8 cases. Now we only have 3 left. The subjective case for the subject, the objective case for direct objects, indirect objects, objects of prepositions, possessive case for possession of all things. And we only use them on our personal pronouns. So I am the subject of the sentence, but the sentence is about me, object of a preposition, and it's my sentence because I made it up. The rest of our nouns is just a rock is a rock is a rock. I throw the rock, direct object, it's rock. The rock is hard, subject, it's rock. Now, Proto-Indo-European, the language from which English and Greek and Latin are descended, had 8 cases, 8 different endings you could put on a word to show how it's used in the sentence. Is it the subject, the direct object, the indirect object? Is it the instrument by which something is done? I hit you with a rock. They wouldn't have used a prepositional phrase. They would have put a different ending on the rock to show that the rocks was used. Location, direct address, different endings for all these things. And that's 8. And then they had 3 genders, masculine and feminine and neuter. And then they had 3 numbers, singular, dual, and plural. They had a separate ending for 2 and only 2, and then 3 or more was. So 8 cases times 3 genders times 3 numbers is 72 different endings.
Wow.
That went on the end of not just personal pronouns, but every noun, pronoun, and adjective, because adjectives had to agree in case, number, and gender with the noun they modified.
And don't get me started on verbs.
Yeah.
Okay.
But now we have a case of hearing from our sponsor who really loves technology.
Oh, John, thanks for springing that on me while I was getting something else ready to show. Can I show you something else though?
Oh,
because
sure.
I was getting ready for
because
this.
You like technology and you want to play with it.
Yeah.
So while he gets that ready, the point is, ancient Greek had 6 cases, Latin had 6, Koine Greek had 5. We're down to 3. Language has been simplifying,
right,
becoming less sophisticated, at least from that standpoint, over time. It's been devolving, not evolving.
Of course, a lot of the reason for English doing that is because it's come into contact with so many other languages. But in any case, what does that look like to you guys? When would you guess that was made?
It looks like a pump almost.
Yeah, it's called the Antikythera Mechanism. Nobody knows what it is, what it did, but it goes back to Roman times.
Mm-hmm.
It was discovered. It has like modern gears. You can see bolts here that held it together in different places. It's kind of a mystery. There's been a lot of speculation as to what it is, but it seems pretty clear that it was something that was mechanical, something that reflected a technology that already existed at that time. And hold on a second, I'm gonna get rid of that.
Okay, but we don't know what it is. That is interesting.
It was technical, it was complicated, and it required pretty advanced metallurgic technology. At least compared to, well, we already knew that their technology wasn't extremely primitive, but we didn't think it was, that looked like they could have been on the verge of creating a mechanical clock, for example, something like that. But we were talking about
they had some pretty impressive mechanical clocks in the Middle Ages, actually.
Oh man, it was an amazing time for mechanical clocks. And, we talk about how the old is not necessarily primitive, but some people, Don, you were starting to talk about this, think we need to get even more advanced and that life will somehow improve. And that was the lead into.
Well, yeah, I mean, Elon Musk wants to do these Neuralink implants. Technology will solve all of the problems, including how to control one another, I think.
Yeah, and might even have some applications in local churches. I'm sure it will, in fact. So that's why our sponsor asks the question, are churches getting a little too individualistic for your tastes? Do you often wish it wasn't so hard to fit in with the new Christians you meet? Would you rather be part of a collective rather than a uniquely gifted member of a fellowship? Well, now you can find freedom from the hassles of having your own personal identity with Assimilation Ministries. At Assimilation Ministries, our pastoral staff is ready to relieve you of the burden of being yourself. No need to choose a new identity. We choose it for you. All our assimilations come with our trans lifetime guarantee. Satisfaction is irrelevant. Assimilation Ministries, where implanted in the body is not just a slogan. So you want to check into them if you want to experience that. What is it? That more advanced approach to existence.
To life.
Resistance is futile.
Yes, it is. You shall be assimilated.
It is. So why is all of this stuff important? I mean, obviously you love ancient literature. You spend a lot of time kind of drudging around in some of the old classics and things like that. I know Ron loves ancient literature. And Joy and I do. We just love literature. We love reading. Because it gives us a window almost into other cultures and other times. And the thing that we keep coming back to is human nature has not really changed in all of the centuries of mankind.
That's right. Well, the bottom line is we have a crisis of confidence in our ability to understand literature, our ability to understand, communicate anything. We talked about we live in a post-truth age because we've lived in a post-meaning age where meaning is in the eye of the beholder. And you create meaning out of the text rather than receiving it from the text, whether it's a book or a movie or whatever. And so in order for Christians to be transformed by the Bible, the message of the Bible, the reality of the Holy Spirit working in that message the way they should be, we desperately need a restoration of confidence in the relevance and meaningfulness of literature in general and the Bible in particular. And so it's a stumbling block for non-Christians to receive the message. They have no confidence that a message can come to them. And Christians to really and truly receive the message as coming from God with his authority so that they begin to conform themselves to it rather than trying to conform it to themselves. We need to understand the difference between the Bible and things like the Enneagram, which interestingly claims to be more ancient than it is.
Yeah.
But it's that desire for a meaning I can create for myself. And here's this thing that's promising to help me do that, rather than the Bible, which is God saying, listen, this is who you are. I know because I made you. And as long as you keep rebelling against that, trying to create your own identity and your own meaning, you're going to be frustrated and you're going to be eventually damned. But there is another path. There is a path to meaning and purpose that is not arbitrary because you didn't just make it up. It's really related to reality. So from the standpoint of hermeneutics, which is another, we could have a whole episode just dealing with postmodern views of meaning and interpretation that undermine the Christian's confidence in the biblical text. And this is a different aspect of it we've been talking about today. People thinking that if it's old, it must be outdated. Not necessarily, no. Being old might be an advantage to the Bible. We need to restore Christians' confidence in God's ability to speak to them through the scriptures so that they may themselves live lives that are pleasing to their Lord, and so that they can effectively communicate the gospel to those who are not yet believers, who also have the same lack of confidence in the ability of a message to truly come through to them from the outside.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that atheists that 2 years ago were against Christianity, trying to argue Christianity should be basically banned from the planet, have suddenly, in fact, I've been thinking about I should write another book, Unlikely Allies, because atheists are starting to come to the idea, or not starting, have come to the idea that, well, maybe we spoke too soon on this issue.
Yeah. Well, that had to do with, social reasons. They found allies among Christians. But
exactly.
What you said earlier about the Enneagram not being as old as advertised, somebody once said there are two kinds of fools. One says this is old, therefore it is good. The other says this is new, therefore it is better. And you still have that tension.
Mm-hmm.
That
the Enneagram would be both of those kinds of fools at the same time.
What's that?
The Enneagram lets you be both of those fools at the same time.
That's right, it does. Well, here's the thing, though. Yeah, it is. It's what's new is what's old is new, and this is old, therefore, and we just discovered it, so it's new. But what I'm getting at here is there is a kind of a cultural. It's not even. Maybe I shouldn't even call it a tension. Sometimes we market things because they're old and reliable and trust. Or there's a market out there for products that are ancient, and we know that there's a demographic, and maybe these two demographics overlap, but we'll say this is based on ancient wisdom, and we'll know it'll sell. And then on the other side, this is based on the latest cutting edge technology, therefore it'll sell. Now, sometimes both of those approaches work with the same group, but and a lot of times they are utterly separate. There's some people who don't trust the new, there's some people who don't trust the old, but there's a lot of people who trust both, and it just depends, I don't know, what they ate for breakfast, whatever, which approach is going to work for them today in terms of selling it. And it's really about selling, it's about persuading.
Whatever fits their agenda of the moment.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think I have observed, and again, you two can correct me on this, is because not only culture, but the church is largely biblically illiterate, they are mostly more easily persuaded that things that they think the Bible teaches, the Bible doesn't actually teach. Like the denigration of women. That's a really big thing today. The Bible teaches this denigration of women. And yet you have atheists like Tom Holland saying, women were elevated because of Christianity. We couldn't have Western culture without Christianity. And as I talk to people, they go, well, how can you say that? What about the Proverbs 31 women? I go, have you read Proverbs 31?
Right. Have you?
Right.
she buys
they say, what do you mean? I said, the first thing I have to tell you is what is missing. And it's an important element. They go, what? I go, it doesn't tell us anything about the Proverbs 31 man, except that he calls his wife blessed and he sits in the gates. We don't even know if the guy has a job. He's not threatened by her real estate practices. She goes out and looks at property, goes, yeah, I think I'll buy it, and she buys it. She runs an import-export business. She handles a household. She seems like a pretty, I'd say, strong-willed, intelligent woman, and they have apparently a really good relationship. He's not holding her down in any way.
The fact that he sits in the gates indicates that he was what today we would call a member of the city council.
Yep.
Okay.
And the fact that he was.
That's where they sat.
And so he was prestigious. He had a prestigious position. And she, in Proverbs 31, she's presented as a good reflection. I mean, they're mutually good reflections of each other. That's the idea.
He's a successful local politician, and she is
an entrepreneur
and helping to make that possible.
And she's the kind of wife that you'd expect a guy like him to have.
The kind of wife everybody wants to have.
The kind of wife everybody wants to have, including a guy who sits in the gates. That's where it was. He was probably one of the elders of the city. He heard cases that were brought.
Right.
So.
Right. And I had a missionary point out to me some years ago. They said, well, who were the ones who supported financially the ministry of Jesus? And he said it was the women primarily.
Bunch of women from Galilee who apparently had independent means and used that to support the disciples.
Right. So now, as you look at the Roman culture, women were subjugated, but Christianity really transformed the view of women and children. In what way? How did that change?
Suffer the little ones to come unto me, said Jesus. And the disciples were shocked when he said that, because that wasn't normal for important people to pay attention to children as if they were important human beings. And the New Testament transforms the dignity of all human beings, including and especially women and children, because they're the ones who needed it the most.
Right.
In Judaism, women were considered unreliable witnesses. They weren't allowed to testify in court.
Right.
And the Christians have the women as the first most important witnesses to the resurrection. No way they would have made that up. No way they would have made, if they were making the story up, no way they would tell it that way. The only way that happens is that's the way it went down. And basically, influenced by Jesus, they didn't have a problem with presenting the story that way. Yeah. And so, the ability to look at women and children and people of despised ethnicities, etc., as full human beings bearing the image of God is a direct fruit of biblical revelation, particularly the New Testament.
So, the question of morality, because the argument is, that's antiquated, old-fashioned, the biblical morality. We're advanced. We don't really need to look back into ancient history, particularly in the Bible, because culture just determines morality on their own. Is that true?
It's true that people think that way.
That's the part that's true.
Yeah. But like I was saying earlier, what's changed between now and, say, the Old Testament? Well, all the different evil things you can do, we have a lot more tools, a lot more methods we can use to do them. But the fact that they're wrong and what makes them wrong hasn't changed. So murder is wrong because God is the creator of life, and life belongs to him and can only be given or taken on his terms. And he's given you the terms. Self-defense, legitimate warfare, police action. Otherwise, don't do it. Because it all goes back to God. And stealing is wrong because all property belongs to God, and you have no business usurping from somebody what God has entrusted to him and not you.
Okay. There's two aspects that I want to go to that. The first one is because the new trend today is to say theft is not necessarily wrong. You can go in as a group and break the counters in jewelry stores and take everything. And that is just
That's because when insurance pays for it, it's not theft. That's
right. If the insurance pays for it, it's not theft. We can't really regard it as theft. My question then really is this: if you could just redefine theft to something that doesn't inconvenience somebody necessarily, that's what it is. Well, do you really believe that? What if I broke into your house and stole everything from you?
Yeah.
Because I assume you have insurance, and therefore the assumption is I could just take your stuff. It isn't how you act that tells you what you believe, but how you react that tells you what you really believe.
Yeah, that's the bottom line response is, are you going to maintain that same theory when somebody does it to you? And the answer is no, you're not. Everybody suddenly becomes a moral absolutist when he is the victim of the crime.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Universally.
Right. So morality really doesn't. In fact, Francis Beckwith had done a book some years ago dealing with the whole question of morality. And one of the things that he points out is for those who want to say, well, morals change from culture to culture, he said that really isn't true. We all have inherently the same kind of moral values.
Mm-hmm.
We just work them out in different ways. And the example he gives is in America, we like beef. McDonald's 100 gazillion sold. We like hamburger. We like our beef. In parts of India, they don't eat beef, but no one really asks the question, why is that the case? They just point out that they don't eat cows. Well, in Jainism, for example, your grandmother may have reincarnated as a cow or a fly or whatever. So you don't eat the beef, not because it's a problem with the beef, but because it is potentially your ancestor. So the more accurate way to look at it would be this: in America, we don't eat grandma. In India, they think the cow is grandma. Therefore, in both cultures, we agree it's wrong to eat grandma.
Yeah, and so the difference is not a difference in morality at all. It's a difference in our understanding of the facts.
Yeah.
Right.
That we're using to apply the same morality. And so if reincarnation is true, then the Indians have made the correct moral application of that set of facts. And if reincarnation is false, then Americans have. But the difference is purely a difference of something other than morality. It's how do you understand the world to which you're applying this morality?
Right.
Yeah, Lewis was right in The Abolition of Man. The wonderful little book. If you haven't read it, it is the most brilliant refutation of relativism ever written. And you've got the logical, philosophical refutation in the front part of the book. And then there's an appendix in the back where Lewis takes all the different religions and cultures of the world and graphs their moral teachings on a chart that shows the continuity that we've been talking about.
That's
interesting. There is a universal and absolute morality that the human race finds itself subject to. Doesn't follow it very well, but we all when we're not being dishonest, recognize that it's there.
Yeah. Okay. So how does this play itself out then for Christians? Because we really do rely on ancient literature that when we take it in context speaks as much to our current, maybe greater to our current place in history even than it did back then. And I say that for this reason. Technology, I think, is interfering with our ability to think clearly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, what I would do, for instance, I don't know, maybe the person who's debating me on this topic and complaining that the Bible is a primitive or an ancient text and therefore primitive maybe that person happens to be a Marxist or have Marxist leanings. So what I might do is say, well, when do you think we really, I don't know, when do you, how new does an idea have to be or to be legitimate? Because I can find socialism in Plato,
Right.
or at least a kind of a rigid, something that in our minds today, because of the way they structured, Plato is trying to structure society, it doesn't exactly correspond. But I might find a quote in the Republic or someplace that is socialist friendly, so to speak, and say, well, what do you think of this? And they'll say, oh, that's a great idea. Or I might find it somewhere else in some other part of ancient literature. And I say, well, wait a minute, it turns out this is a very old idea. So not everything that's old is necessarily primitive and therefore bad. And really, the word primitive just means simple. So are you saying that everything that is simple is not worth doing or thinking about? Aren't some things better because they are simple? What you really mean, of course, by simple is undeveloped. It's not sophisticated enough. It's not up to par with where we need to be technologically and thought-wise. Well, guess what? I can find a ton of stuff in ancient literature that this modern or postmodern person will probably like. He'll probably think it is. These are really great ideas, even though they're very ancient. And really, what I'd end up showing him is that there really isn't very much that's really new. What we've really done is when it comes to things, especially things like how to organize society, and questions that go into metaphysics and religion, the only thing that makes these things new is that they found a way to reorganize the material and put it in a different, I like to use the word constellation. They take the stars and they rearrange them into a different constellation. They say, a totally new constellation. No, you just moved the stars around. Maybe you got rid of some and added some others that from another place in the sky, but you really haven't really added anything new here, especially when it comes to the kinds of things that the Bible addresses. What are those? Faith and practice. What we believe.
One of the things that ancient literature, including and especially the Bible, can do is strip away the distractions, reduce life to its basic, simple elements so that clarity becomes possible. It really helps to take us out of this machine environment we've created for ourselves, get us back to the bedrock of reality, and precisely because it's a different culture that we don't immediately recognize as our own, that gives us the opportunity to see things afresh and to see the truth.
It's interesting
going ahead to a future world that's not exactly the way we experience it can do the same thing, which is why science fiction is one of the great sources of philosophical reflection in literature. But the idea that if it's outside of my comfort zone, I don't need to deal with it is insulating yourself against reality and truth and meaning and everything else that's worth having.
Yeah, what we tend to miss, I think, as a culture today, because we look at all of the really cool stuff that we have. A watch that'll measure my heartbeat while I do my exercises and tell me how many calories they burn and those kinds of things. When back in the ancient days, they could tell time. They may not be able to do all these other things. So the technology advanced. They had homes. They needed to eat. They needed to farm. They needed to have relationships with one another. Those things are actually constant down through all of the generations. So our technology may advance, but that doesn't make us better as a culture or as individuals necessarily. The things that really matter are those things that have been constant all through culture.
And what did it really change other than the fact that we can do things more efficiently? What did it really change? Did it really give us insight into existence? Did it really give us a different perspective on how humans interact? Did it really negate the idea of original sin, for example?
Yeah.
I love the story when Ronald Reagan was governor of California and the protesters were outside. They were protesting and they demanded to be let in to see Governor Reagan. And Reagan said, sure, let him in. And they all flooded into his office, and they were throwing all these questions at him like, why does your generation think it should be able to call the shots? And one of the kids said, you guys are old and outdated. Where were you? You guys didn't even have mass communication back then. Where were you guys when we needed mass communication? And Reagan's answer was, oh, we were busy inventing it for you.
Exactly.
It's like, who do you think gave you this mass communication? It's like we're antiquated because we didn't have it. We created it. And guess what? We're looking at you kids now, and we're thinking maybe we shouldn't have done that. Maybe we should take, maybe we should take it away from you because you're a bunch of spoiled morons.
We now have incalculable computer power at our fingertips, and we use it to share pictures of our breakfast and our cats.
Yeah, right.
It's like,
one of the lines. If you're a Star Trek fan, you'll remember this, especially if you watched the original series when it was first aired, like I did. I was just a kid, but I watched it. And, if you like the movie Star Trek, The Wrath of Khan, go back and watch the original Khan episode from the original series. Here's this guy. Ricardo Montalban's the same actor. He's portraying this guy named Khan who has been asleep for like Rip Van Winkle years, about 200. He wakes up in the century of Star Trek and he's catching up and he's looking at these computer screens and getting himself up to date. And he says to Kirk, he says, yeah, the technology is amazing, but man, how much is man? Man hasn't really changed. He was disappointed that humanity hadn't really changed, and that was prescient for them to put that line in the series, because now here we are just like 50 years later, or going on 60.
Even more tragically, he had not really changed.
Right. In the movie, you mean? Or Khan hadn't changed, that's for sure.
No.
And it's true, though. Technology does not essentially change us. It doesn't really even make us smarter. In fact, there are a lot of ways it makes us dumber.
Right.
I mean, think about the stupidity, the sheer stupidity of knowing, of having at your fingertips. Now you and I and everybody has at our fingertips an unprecedented library of knowledge just on Google Books alone. Virtually everything that was printed that they can get their hands on for the past, I've found books from the 1500s on Google Books. Okay, in English. Okay, think about the stupidity of having that all at your fingertips and not reading a word of it, and yet pontificating about what is truth, what the ancients, what the early moderns even believed, and you haven't even read it.
My students don't think they need to keep facts in their heads because they can always Google it. But the problem is, if you don't have a framework of knowledge in your head, you don't have context for this fact that you just Googled to understand.
That's right.
How it fits in.
That is right.
What it means, what can be done with it, what should be done about it. It's just
so that because we can find out, we don't have to learn. Because we can learn.
Yeah, on your screen for a second and it's gone, and it changes nothing.
Yeah, you become lazy thinkers.
But actually, I would argue we've always been that way. I would argue we've always had libraries right down the street from us. Some of us have had. I mean, I have a pretty good library. So you do too. I was once in the library of our registrar at the seminary I was working in, and I said, "Does anybody ask you if you've ever read all your books?" And he says, "Oh, I have a pat answer for that." And what is it? He goes, "I've read some of them twice."
Yeah,
it doesn't answer the question, but
we become lazy thinkers in a lot of ways. But you're right, we don't read. There was a time, and you both would remember this, when you had memorized all of the important phone numbers. And so you picked up a phone and did something called dial a phone number.
Right.
Back in the old days.
312-389-3264. That was the number I learned when I was 6 years old. Okay. That was my first.
677-632.
Right. And I remember my grandfather saying Fulton 55575, because he dealt with the exchanges before they got rid of those.
I memorized my social security number. I mean, I memorized everything. When I worked in a trade doing drywall, I could go measure all the measurements on a plumbing wall for all of the pipes and electrical boxes. Go to lunch, come back, and cut it all from memory.
When one of my
we don't really do that anymore. Everything is written.
In 1980, I worked in downtown Chicago. I had a customer who was a retired African American customer who was a retired postmaster for, I don't know where he worked, but he had every zip code in the country memorized. And this is 1980. Zip codes hadn't been around that long. Right. You know, we hadn't been using that system but he memorized every single one of them.
So that is a problem with technology. I would suggest is it alleviates us of the habits of reading and learning and memorize, because we can, as you point out, just go to the internet on any knowledge we want. And that is a valuable tool, but we lose something even more valuable. That is the ability to think through big questions in life. And that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
So, and with that, one of the big things I have to point out is Ron has a place to be, so we are going to need to end.
Yeah, I have to go pick up a couple of kids from school every day at about
all
this time.
Good things must come to an end.
Yes. Nice to have you, Don.
Broadcast is coming to an end. Therefore, this broadcast was a good thing. Point to the first
I love that.
Chronological fallacy. I just
that was like what Woody Allen once said. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore all men are Socrates. Okay, let's give credit to where credit is due. Our resident cult leader profiler is Neil before me. Our wardrobe manager is See How It Fits You. Our culinary services come from Chef Ham and Cheese. Our tinfoil hat provisioner is Just In Case. Jehovah's Witnesses coverage is provided by Armageddon and D Opposer. Our Mormon Archives manager is Polygummus. Our Liberal Denominations Bureau chief is Lucy Goosey. Our transgender issues coverage is Ben Hur, our special correspondent for cults based on the Hindenburg disaster, and Flying Turkeys, OD Humanity. Our fact-checking supervisor is Yoleg Pulling. Technical assistance comes from Wiki Research. Our legal advisors are at the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham and Howe. Our grievance resolution director is Giovanna P. Samina. Our director of privacy assurance is wiretapping, and original idea sourcing comes from Drew A. Blank. The Unknown Webcast is a production of Midwest Christian Outreach Inc. in cooperation with Emergency Manicure Productions, both of whom are solely responsible for this content, although you will never be able to prove that in a court of law. Never.
Love the music. Okay, and with that, we can all do the royal wave. I've been practicing.
Okay, I got to do it over here. Yes.